Hello and welcome to this mini educational office ergonomics video where we'll talk about what we already know about how to make office ergonomics or offices as healthy and productive as possible and what we have yet to learn. I'm Dr. Nancy Black. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at Université de Moncton, and I am both a professional engineer and a certified Canadian professional ergonomist. You see at the bottom of this current slide that there are different postures that we use over the course of the day, and that's absolutely normal. And that's part of what I want to take away from what we're doing is to demystify what is good and what is less good. So for today, we'll be talking about the context of office work, some of the risks that we know exist, what the options are in terms of improving or attenuating those risks, and what recommendations we have for people doing office work. We'll also talk about the study that we are currently engaged in, so what we're yet learning, where we'll talk about the conditions that we'll be testing, the equipment involved, and the benefits and risks. So to start off with a little bit more, making sure that we all understand what ergonomics is, and the International Ergonomics Association has created this definition where it talks about the harmonization of things that people interact with and taking into account the person's needs, abilities, and limitations. So we're taking the person as a whole. We aren't trying to change the person, but rather looking at how the person acts relative to their job, relative to the products that we supply for them to use, relative to the tasks that we ask them to do in their organizational environment and in the physical environment that they work. The Association of Canadian Ergonomists has created a definition similar, but that puts a bit of focus on something else. So it talks about the interactions, again, between the humans and other things, people, environment, objects, but it emphasizes this goal of optimizing both human well-being and system performance. So that's the context we have going into office environments applying ergonomics. Why is this so important? Well, because more and more of us are using computers and indeed the internet in our working context, whether that be at home or whether that be at whatever environment we work. In 2003, so almost 20 years ago now, there was a study in the United States which looked at how many people used a computer at work. And you see that at that time, already on average, 55% of the population used a computer at work, and somewhat less used the internet. That's not so important to us anymore because we know the internet is everywhere. When we look more recently at the progression over time, in the UK we see that back in 2007, the numbers of people using internet at their workplace was somewhere between 45 and 35%, but that has steadily increased to a point where we're now between 60 and 70% with really any size of different company. This one data point is a bit of an outlier, and I'm not too concerned about it, especially when we look at from the Statistica compilation of data about households with a computer in developed countries. So that means basically any economically strong country, and you see that we're almost at 80% in recent years. So not only are we using those computers at our workplace, up to about 70% or thereabouts, but at home as well, we are doing so. Very, very ubiquitous. But so what are the risks of doing work with a computer? The first is that we tend to be sedentary when we're doing computer work. And when one is sedentary, there are health risks. In the first year of changing from a physically active workplace to one where one is sitting down largely or moving very little, there is 3 times the chance of having a cardiovascular event, a heart attack or something along those lines. And that has been seen over and over again. Furthermore, the more one sits, the worse one's metabolic health is. So one's physiology actually adapts to the fact that one is not moving, and that leads to things like I have the same sandwich I've always had, but I start to grow wide a bit more. And how much do we sit? Well, back in 2003 already, when they looked at people at work, about 75% of the day, so 6 hours out of 8, was spent sitting. And that again is tending to increase over time. Another study looking at the 24-hour-a-day clock found that around 55% of the day when one was awake, one was seated. And indeed, if we talk about workplaces where really you're stuck with a computer, call centers is one of those, and we know it well here in New Brunswick. In those environments, 80% of one's workday tends to be seated, and we're using computers intensively. We do change posture, getting up, sitting down, walking a bit, and that actually happens pretty frequently in that it's about 10 times an hour on average, but those changes are of very brief duration and they don't all occur spaced out in an even way over the course of the day. So here we see on the right-hand side the variety of different workplaces, and you notice that as we go forward in time, things are becoming more different and allowing one to do work. So if we look, though, at that second workplace sort of area where we have a good chair, a keyboard tray, this is what we have discovered when we observed people over the course of a workday. We put markers on them and we asked them to just continue to do their work, and we ran the video camera. And so we had about 1/3 of the time where people were in the neutral posture, head above shoulders, arms about the same height as the working surface, so all looked good, but about 1/3 of the time again one was slouched. And then there was a period, not insignificant, where one was in a more extreme posture, but again static, is this seated translation. And in that posture, what's particularly concerning is the neck, because one has this tendency to put it into an extension, and the neck is forward of the shoulders. In these studies, we were using video, and so we couldn't see what people were doing if they weren't at their workstation. And indeed, about 1/4 of the time, people moved away from their work surface. So part of what we need to know is what are people doing, in fact, over the course of their working days, whether or not they're in their regular work environment. So we know that people 25% of the time were moving somewhat, and indeed that is something that we want to encourage. When one has a data entry task, so there is no reason to move, studying the muscular activation, my colleague Linda McLean and colleagues found that the muscular activation actually took little breaks, periodic breaks, about once every 20 minutes, no more than once every 40 minutes. So while the person was continuing to work, their body was taking these breaks, even if they were not. As a result of that work, we came out with the general recommendation that you should be taking brief breaks, and so we call those micro breaks. They could be 20 seconds, 30 seconds, but be physically active in those few seconds, and that will help you, in fact, work better. And so we found that when people took micro breaks, about every 20 minutes, there was no degradation in the productivity that they did, and they felt better. Another interesting complement is some work that was done by Fenity and Walker, who are physiotherapists, and they discovered that people when they move, they tend to move more if they are uncomfortable. And on the opposite side of that, when one moves in proactive fashion, there is less discomfort that develops. So things like workstations which allow you or support change, like between sit and stand, are indeed a positive element. But they don't necessarily do enough. As Wilkes' study there points out, people tend to stand somewhat more. But is that? Okay, so now we've talked about what those research projects have shown to date, but what can you actually get? How can you make this work in your place? So the first thing one could do is have a workplace which is a fixed surface, but with a keyboard tray that allows you to move that, a good chair that is adjustable in the vertical so that you can have your visual field just below the horizontal directly in front of you. Pretty good. Okay, a number of different elements there. One could alternatively, to support the sit-stand changes, have something like this one here, which is actually from human scale and attaches to your desk. So the desk is a fixed height, but this surface here moves with your screen up and down, encouraging bringing your work area completely up and completely down. So the work table remains, but your work surface actually moves. Along those lines, so that's a manual system where you pull it up and down. One could instead have a system like this one, where these two surfaces are able to be moved up and down with an electrical button, just a little controller. So very easy to move, and that's interesting because in this case the workplace has each one of these two surfaces completely independently movable, so it makes it quite easy to move. They still have a very generous chair with a good backrest, the lumbar back with its curve here. People don't actually tend to stand that much. That's again a challenge. This is the workstation that I was talking to you about before, where it goes up, down, in, side to side, and in and out. So that's another option. As is this one, which is not dynamic. It's got a surface that you lean back on and basically are standing up on a cushioned surface, and you raise the surface that you're working on so that you are standing but with some support. One of the interesting things we found when we studied this was that people tended to get uncomfortable after about 45 minutes, so they got up and moved. Not necessarily bad. And finally, the workstations that we're going to be studying in the course of this project are sit-stand, height adjustable, electrically powered desk and an under-the-desk bike. So we'll talk a little bit more about those options after we finished with the recommendations. So, office ergonomics. What do you want when you're talking about the things that you're interacting with? First thing is head above shoulders, directly above. As I've already mentioned, your eyes should be slightly lower than the horizontal to see the region that you are going to be working with on your computer screen. If it's beyond that area, one tends to move one's neck to compensate because your eyes are the first thing that we want to make happy. The second thing is the back should be supported with the backrest with, again, this curve inside in the lower back where we have a very flexible area of your back. And that promotes that curve, but know that just by sitting down and having this angle, which is typically slightly over 90 degrees, then this flattening of the back is just a natural change. But having a support will assist in not having your back fatigue as much. In terms of your arms, the elbow should be at somewhat more than 90 degrees. The wrist should be straight when you are doing your typing or your mousing. And all of that should be straightforward as well, not deviated one way or another. So about 90 degrees, 0 degrees in your wrist, here in the hips, slightly more than 90 degrees again, up to 120. Similarly for the knees, slightly more than 90. And then finally, your feet should be supported on the ground rather than hanging in the air. I've got a couple other points here. You should be adjusting your chair throughout the day regularly, and similarly adjusting the workstation if you can. So moving it up and down. Again, movement is good. Now, what other things can support movement? We've got things like a cycling workstation, like this under the desk bike that we were just talking about. And some research recently in 2019 compared such tools with a walk station where one is walking on a treadmill or a continuously standing, just static workstation. And they found that simple processing tasks, so cognitive thinking, was better and faster, and one felt more aroused, so awake, when using the cycling as compared to a standing workstation. If we go a bit further with that under the desk bike idea, there has been some research about that, and they found that having access to such a tool does help to reduce the periods that one is sedentary amongst office workers. It also tends to improve attention, work performance, and worker motivation. You'll notice that that didn't happen for everyone, but it happened for at least half the population, according to this study in 2017. Finally, why just use a tool around us? What about something that can interact with us and encourage us even more? And that's the idea around gamification. So with an interface that is fun to use, then training and cognitive assessments tended to be more enjoyed as opposed to feeling like they were an effort, a frustration, or just repetitive. So that sounds good. Cognitive training. People tend to be more motivated and engaged. On the other hand, they may perceive that the demands that are being made of them or the difficulty also increases. So some positive and some less positive. It may help, that sort of tool, to change behavior in sitting workers, so reminding them to change their posture, and may also increase enjoyment and productivity at work. So what we're asking in the current study is really if using that under the desk bike and gamification results in the best postural.
At this point, you are still watching the video about our current study in 2025 about the impact of workstation with under the desk bicycle and gamified interface. My name is Josue Balaluka Ishara, and I'm an assistant research at the Laboratory of Ergonomics, Biomedical and Industrial Engineering at Université de Moncton, and I will be the first point of communication between you and the research team. The first step to complete after watching the video is to complete the initial questionnaires, and for the questionnaires we have just two forms to complete. The first form is to evaluate your work environment, and the second form is to evaluate the initial physical discomfort at the beginning of the study. The second step is an on-site visit, just to visit your site and to see if the site will respect the workstation ergonomics adjustment as feasible. And after the third step will give you the sensor, and you can begin the regular workstation. Just to remember you that this year study is tested over 5 weeks, and the first week we will test the regular workstation. You are using your workstation as normal, and we will give you the sensor just to see the evolution with your regular workstation. And and after that, there is a 2 weeks of ergonomics workstation using our table and the under desk bicycle. And after that, there is a post regular workstation. You still using your workstation, and all of that is to evaluate the impact of of the ergonomics workstation and impact of the research on your physique wave. So after that step, the last step is the final interview. The final interview is just to evaluate your progress during this study, and yeah, it's the final interview, and then we are closing the study. The physical discomfort form to complete, as I mentioned it, is really important because it helps us to know your physical discomfort, and we try to understand the body zone of you feel some physical discomfort, and which side of that body can be the left side or the right side or both sides, and the frequency and intensity of that physical discomfort. During all the process of our study, we'll use the sensors to collect data from you. The goal of the sensor is to measure to collect data from your movements, daily movements and posture. There is nothing like any electrical shock coming from the sensor or anything like that. The sensor will use it like an Apple Watch, and the goal is to collect data from you. And for the first week, you will wear the actigraph sensor. The actigraph sensor, you will wear that during your working days, and 1 hour per week will come and with some other sensor like the captive sensor, just to measure your posture during during that 1 hour of working day, and your physiology with a nurse rate sensor. And after each day, you have to complete daily form to see the stiffness, the fatigue, the neck pain, using your workstation or using the workstation will give you. And that the goal of all of that is just to have global information about the research we are doing this year. If you have any question, any comment, or any concern about our research, you can reach us at the address on the screen, and we'll be glad to respond to your question. Thank you and have a good day.